Accountant abandons millionaire with 100-minute loss, but the poor 7-year-old maid's daughter breaks his heart with one word. Before we share this sorrowful tale of solitude and pain, tell us where you're watching from and subscribe for more heartfelt stories. The crystal chandelier in Marcus Wellington's penthouse office trembled as his fist slammed against the mahogany desk. Papers scattered like autumn leaves, and the silence that followed was more terrifying than his rage. His accountant, Robert Harrison, stood frozen by the doorway, briefcase still clutched in his trembling hands. $100 million, Robert, gone. Marcus's voice was deadly calm now, more frightening than his earlier shouting. 20 years building this empire, and you've destroyed it in 6 months. Robert's face had drained of all color. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the air conditioning that kept the executive floor at a perfect 72 degrees. Marcus, I can explain. Explain? Marcus laughed bitterly, running his hands through his silver hair. Explain how my most trusted friend, my business partner for 15 years, has been embezzling from Wellington Industries. Explain how you've been living in a mansion while my company bleeds money. Explain how you've been stealing from the pension funds of people who trusted us with their retirement. The weight of betrayal pressed down on Marcus like a physical force. Robert had been more than an employee. He'd been family. They'd built this technology company together from nothing, working 18-hour days in a cramped garage, surviving on instant coffee and dreams. Marcus had been best man at Robert's wedding. Godfather to his children, had trusted him with everything. The gambling debts, Robert began, his voice cracking like a teenager's. Don't! Marcus held up his hand, his wedding ring catching the light from the floor-to-ceiling windows. Just don't. Security is already on their way up. The FBI will be here within the hour. You have 5 minutes to gather your things and leave before I do something we'll both regret. As Robert gathered his belongings with shaking hands, Marcus stared out at the Seattle skyline. The Space Needle pierced the grey clouds like an accusation, and the sound stretched endlessly toward the Olympic Mountains. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent decades helping other companies with their financial crises, only to have his own empire crumble from within. The technology patents they'd developed were worthless now, the company's reputation in ruins, investors pulling out faster than water through a broken dam. The elevator doors closed behind Robert with a soft ding, leaving Marcus alone with the wreckage of his life. At 52, he was starting over. The penthouse would have to go. The cars, the yacht, the vacation home in the San Juan Islands, everything. But it was the betrayal that cut deepest, the realization that the man he'd trusted most had been systematically destroying everything they'd built together. His phone buzzed with another message from his lawyer. The media had caught wind of the scandal. By morning, his name would be splashed across every financial newspaper in the country. Wellington Industries, once valued at $500 million and employing over 3,000 people, was now hemorrhaging money and facing bankruptcy. The employees he'd promised secure futures would be devastated. The investors who'd believed in his vision would lose millions. Marcus loosened his tie and sank into his leather chair one last time. The chair had cost more than most people made in a month, a symbol of success that now felt like a mockery. Tomorrow, he'd have to face his employees, good people who'd trusted him with their livelihoods. Tomorrow, he'd have to explain how their secure jobs had vanished overnight. But tonight, he just sat in the growing darkness, watching the city lights twinkle below, wondering how everything had gone so terribly wrong. The empire he'd spent his life building was crashing down, and he was powerless to stop it, or so he thought. Sometimes, salvation comes from the most unexpected places, wearing the face of a 7-year-old girl with extraordinary gifts who would change everything he thought he knew about second chances and the power of seeing the world through innocent eyes. 3 weeks later, Marcus Wellington barely recognized himself in the mirror of his modest downtown apartment. The designer suits had been replaced by simple khakis and button-down shirts from Target. The silver Rolex was gone, sold along with everything else of value to pay legal fees and basic living expenses. His reflection looked older, more weathered, but perhaps more real than it had in years. The man staring back at him looked like someone who had lived through something, rather than someone who had simply accumulated wealth. The apartment was a far cry from his former penthouse, a one-bedroom unit in an older building where the elevator sometimes worked and the radiator clanged like a ghost in chains. But the rent was affordable at $800 a month, and the elderly landlady, Mrs. Chen, had been kind enough to overlook his sudden change in circumstances when the news stories painted him as another fallen corporate titan. She'd looked past the headlines to see a man who paid his rent on time and kept to himself. The neighborhood was different too. Instead of the pristine streets of Bellevue, he now lived among working families, single mothers, elderly retirees on fixed incomes. The sounds were different: children playing in the courtyard, television programs in multiple languages filtering through thin walls, the distant hum of the interstate. It was more alive somehow, more human than the sterile luxury he'd grown accustomed to. "Mr. Wellington?" A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "It's Maria, from the cleaning service." Marcus opened the door to find a petite Hispanic woman in her 30s, wearing a simple blue uniform and carrying a bucket of supplies. Her warm brown eyes held a kindness that seemed genuine, untainted by the false pleasantries he'd grown accustomed to in his former life. There was something about her presence that felt like a breath of fresh air in his suffocating new reality, an authenticity that had been missing from his world of corporate meetings and power lunches. "I'm sorry I'm early," Maria said with a slight accent that spoke of careful English, learned as a second language. "Mrs. Chen said you might need some help settling in. Please come in, and call me Marcus." He stepped aside, suddenly self-conscious about his humble surroundings. The contrast with his former life was stark. Instead of marble floors and designer furniture, he had second-hand pieces and linoleum that had seen better decades. "I've never actually hired cleaning help before, not personally anyway. My assistant used to handle all of that." Maria smiled as she surveyed the sparse apartment, her eyes taking in the single chair, the folding table, the mattress on the floor where a king-sized bed used to be. But there was no judgment in her expression, only the practical assessment of someone who understood how to make do with less. "It's a nice place. Good light from those windows, and the neighborhood is safe, good for families." As she began organizing her supplies with practiced efficiency, Marcus found himself curious about this woman who seemed so at ease with life's simple pleasures. Her movements were graceful, purposeful, speaking of someone who took pride in her work, regardless of how humble others might consider it. There was a dignity in the way she approached her tasks that reminded him of values he'd lost somewhere along the way. "Do you have family nearby?" he asked, settling into his only chair, a folding metal contraption that would have horrified his former decorator. "My daughter, Emma, she's 7. Maria's face lit up when she mentioned the child, transforming her tired features into something radiant. The love in her voice was unmistakable, the kind of pure parental devotion that transcended circumstances. "She comes with me sometimes when school's out. Very smart girl, always asking questions, always reading books that are way too advanced for her age." There was pride in her voice, but also something else Marcus couldn't quite identify. A weariness that spoke of struggles he could only imagine, of dreams deferred and sacrifices made in silence. The kind of exhaustion that came from working multiple jobs to make ends meet, from worrying about things like health insurance and school supplies, and whether there would be enough money for both rent and groceries. "Where does she go to school?" he asked, genuinely interested for the first time in weeks. "Riverside Elementary. It's not the best school, but Emma makes the most of it. She's special. Teachers say she understands things that children her age shouldn't understand." Maria paused in her dusting, a shadow crossing her face. "Sometimes I wonder if she's too smart for her own good. The world isn't always kind to people who see things differently." Marcus nodded, understanding more than he expected to. Something about Maria's quiet strength reminded him of his own mother, who'd worked 3 jobs to put him through college, before the money and success had complicated everything, before he'd forgotten what really mattered in the pursuit of bigger numbers and larger profits. His mother had possessed the same unshakable dignity, the same fierce love for her child, the same ability to find hope in the darkest circumstances. Emma Rodriguez pressed her small nose against the car window as her mother parked outside the old downtown building. At 7 years old, she had inherited her mother's warm brown eyes, but possessed an intensity that seemed far beyond her years. Her school uniform was neat but worn, carefully maintained despite its age, and her backpack was heavy with books that most children her age wouldn't attempt to read. Advanced mathematics texts she'd borrowed from the public library. Science journals she'd found in the recycling bin behind the university. The building they were approaching looked tired, its brick facade stained with age and weather, but Emma saw beauty in the patterns of the water stains, mathematical sequences in the arrangement of windows, geometric relationships in the fire escape that zigzagged up the side like a giant equation made of metal and shadow. "Remember what we talked about, Mija," Maria said softly, turning to face her daughter in the rear-view mirror. "Mr. Wellington is going through a difficult time. He lost his business, so we need to be respectful and quiet." Emma nodded solemnly, her expression serious in the way children get when they understand that adult problems are complex and fragile. She had an unusual ability to understand adult conversations, often picking up on subtleties that other children missed entirely. Her teachers had mentioned this gift to Maria countless times, suggesting Emma might benefit from advanced programs the family simply couldn't afford on a cleaning woman's salary of $12 an hour. "Is he sad like you were when Papa left?" Emma asked, her young voice carrying an emotional intelligence that never ceased to amaze her mother. Maria's heart clenched at the memory. Emma's father had abandoned them 2 years ago, unable to handle the responsibility of a family and a daughter whose extraordinary mind he couldn't understand. He'd called Emma weird and too intense, complaints that had cut Maria deeper than any personal insult could have. "Yes, sweetheart, sometimes adults make mistakes, and it hurts for a long time, but we always find ways to keep going, don't we?" They climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, Emma's small hand gripping the banister as she counted each step, a habit she'd developed for everything she encountered. 27 steps to the 3rd floor, she noted automatically. Numbers had always fascinated her, patterns and equations appearing in her mind like pieces of a puzzle she was born to solve. While other children saw a staircase, Emma saw mathematical relationships, load distributions, architectural principles at work. Marcus opened the door looking haggard but trying to smile. His silver hair was disheveled and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and endless worry. The apartment behind him was sparse, almost monastic in its simplicity, a stark contrast to what Emma imagined a rich businessman's home should look like. "You must be Emma. Your mother has told me wonderful things about you." Emma studied him with the direct gaze that sometimes made adults uncomfortable. She saw past the tired eyes to something deeper, a man who had built something beautiful and watched it crumble. She recognized the same look her mother had worn for months after Emma's father abandoned them, that particular kind of pain that comes from having your trust shattered by someone you loved. "Hello, Mr. Wellington. Mama says you used to have a big company with computers and important things." "I did." Marcus knelt to her level, surprised by her directness and the maturity in her voice. There was something almost otherworldly about this child, an intelligence that seemed to burn behind her eyes like a flame. But sometimes life changes in ways we don't expect. While Maria began her cleaning routine, moving with the quiet efficiency of someone who had perfected the art of making spaces beautiful on a limited budget, Emma wandered to Marcus's laptop sitting open on the small dining table. The screen showed spreadsheets with columns of red numbers, financial statements that told the story of his company's collapse in a language most adults struggled to read. But to Emma, The patterns were as clear as words on a page, mathematical relationships that spoke of systems in distress. "Emma, don't touch Mr. Wellington's things," Maria called from the kitchen, her voice carrying the practiced caution of a mother who knew her daughter's curiosity could sometimes lead to trouble. But Marcus was intrigued by the intensity in Emma's young face as she stared at the screen. There was something almost hypnotic about her concentration, the way she seemed to absorb information at a rate that defied explanation. "It's all right. Do you like math, Emma?" "Numbers tell stories," Emma said simply, her eyes still fixed on the screen. "But sometimes people don't listen to what they're really saying. They're too busy being scared to hear the truth." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. This child, barely tall enough to see over the table properly, had just articulated something that had eluded his entire financial team for months. There was something extraordinary happening here, something that made the air in the room feel charged with possibility. The laptop screen flickered in the afternoon light as Emma stood transfixed by the maze of numbers and formulas that had been Marcus Wellington's obsession for weeks. While her mother vacuumed the small living room, the methodical sound providing a rhythmic backdrop to the moment, Emma's 7-year-old mind began processing the financial data with an intensity that would have impressed graduate students in economics at the nearby University of Washington. She had always been different, a fact that had been apparent from the time she was 3, and began reading chapter books while other children were still learning their letters. Teachers whispered about her unusual abilities, how she could solve complex math problems in her head while other children struggled with basic addition, how she would finish her assignments in minutes and then sit quietly, creating intricate patterns with her pencils while waiting for everyone else to catch up. But Emma had learned to hide her gift, understanding instinctively that being different sometimes made people uncomfortable, especially other children who couldn't understand why she found their games boring and preferred reading encyclopedia entries about quantum physics. "These numbers are crying," she said softly, more to herself than to Marcus, who was watching her from across the room with growing fascination. "What do you mean?" Marcus approached slowly, not wanting to disturb whatever was happening in that remarkable young mind. He'd witnessed many brilliant people work through complex problems over the years, but there was something different about watching Emma. She seemed to absorb information in ways that defied conventional understanding. Emma pointed to a column of figures representing quarterly losses. Her small finger traced patterns in the air above the screen, as if she could see connections that existed in 3 dimensions. "See how they keep getting bigger? Like when I'm sad and I cry harder and harder until Mama holds me. These numbers are doing the same thing. They're getting more and more upset because something is hurting them. And nobody knows how to make it stop." Marcus felt his breath catch. In all his years of business, through countless financial crises and corporate recoveries, he'd never thought of financial data in emotional terms. But as Emma spoke, he began to see patterns he'd missed, not just numbers, but relationships, connections that his adult mind had been too complicated to grasp. It was as if she was translating a foreign language he'd been trying to understand for months. "The problem isn't here," Emma continued, scrolling through pages of financial statements with surprising familiarity, her small fingers navigating the complex spreadsheets as if she'd been working with them for years. "It's like when my toy is broken, but everyone keeps trying to fix the wrong part. They keep pushing the same buttons over and over, but the problem is inside, where you can't see it." The metaphor was simple, childlike, but it cut to the heart of something Marcus had been struggling to articulate. His team had been treating symptoms, not causes. They'd been so focused on the obvious problems, the embezzlement, the lost investors, the damaged reputation, that they'd missed something fundamental. "Emma, sweetheart," Maria called nervously, noticing her daughter's intense focus on the computer. She knew that look, had seen it countless times when Emma became absorbed in puzzles or problems that seemed to consume her entire attention. "Please don't touch Mr. Wellington's things." "It's fine," Marcus said, his voice tight with an emotion he couldn't name, part hope, part fear, part amazement at what he was witnessing. "She's not hurting anything." But that wasn't entirely true. Emma was doing something that terrified and fascinated him in equal measure. She was seeing his company's collapse with fresh eyes, approaching the crisis without the baggage of conventional thinking that had trapped his team of experts with their advanced degrees and decades of experience. She was looking at his life's work with the unbiased perspective of someone who hadn't been taught that certain solutions were impossible. "The mistake is here," Emma said suddenly, her small finger pointing to a series of calculations buried deep in a subsidiary's financial report. The calculation was so complex, so buried in layers of mathematical modeling, that even Marcus had stopped questioning its accuracy weeks ago. It was part of a sophisticated algorithm designed by his best financial minds, a formula that was supposed to streamline their reporting process. "This number doesn't match this one, and it's making all the other numbers sick." Marcus leaned over her shoulder, his heart beginning to race as he followed her logic. The calculation she'd identified was part of a complex algorithm his accounting team had developed months ago, a formula designed to streamline their financial reporting, but now revealed to be fundamentally flawed. As he traced the mathematical thread she'd pulled from the tangled web of his company's finances, he realized with growing amazement that she was right. This impossible, brilliant little girl was absolutely right. The error was subtle, hidden within layers of legitimate calculations, but it had been compounding for months, like a cancer eating away at the company's true financial health. Robert's embezzlement had been devastating, but this computational error had been slowly bleeding the company dry long before the theft was discovered. "Emma, how did you—" Marcus began, then stopped. The question died in his throat as he began following her logic more deeply, seeing connections and patterns that had eluded him for months. She had found the needle in the haystack, the single thread that, when pulled, would unravel the entire mystery of his company's seemingly impossible collapse. The silence in the small apartment stretched like a held breath as Marcus Wellington stared at the computer screen, his hands trembling slightly as he began to verify Emma's discovery with the methodical precision of a man who couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. The little girl stood beside him, patient and calm, as if pointing out multi-million-dollar accounting errors was something she did every day. Just another puzzle to solve, another pattern to identify and correct in a world full of broken systems that needed fixing. The numbers on the screen began to shift and change as Marcus input Emma's corrections, and what emerged was a completely different picture of Wellington Industries' financial health. Instead of the catastrophic losses that had driven him to the brink of bankruptcy, the corrected calculations revealed a company that was not only solvent but positioned for significant growth. The algorithmic error had been like a funhouse mirror, distorting everything it reflected until reality became unrecognizable. "Emma," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible above the hum of the refrigerator in the adjacent kitchen. "Do you understand what you've just found?" She looked up at him with those impossibly wise brown eyes, tilting her head slightly in the way children do when they're trying to understand why adults make things so complicated. Her expression was serious but somehow pleased, like a student who'd finally solved a problem that had been bothering her teacher for a very long time. The numbers were lying to each other. When numbers lie, everything gets confused and sad. It's like when people don't tell the truth. It makes everyone around them unhappy too. Maria had stopped vacuuming, the sudden silence in the room drawing her attention like a magnet. She could sense the charged atmosphere, the way Marcus was staring at her daughter with an expression she'd never seen before. Part amazement, part disbelief, part something that looked almost like reverence. It was the look people got when they witnessed something that challenged their understanding of what was possible. "Is everything all right?" she asked, approaching cautiously, her protective instincts heightened by the intensity of Marcus's focus on Emma. She'd seen adults react strangely to her daughter's abilities before, and it always made her nervous. Emma was still just a child, despite her extraordinary mind. Marcus couldn't find words adequate to express what had just happened. He was frantically cross-referencing Emma's discovery with other financial documents, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he watched months of apparent losses transform into hidden profits. The computational error had been so deeply embedded in their system that it had corrupted every financial projection, every investor report, every decision made in the last 8 months. It was like discovering that a fundamental assumption about reality was wrong. "Maria," Marcus said finally, his voice cracking with emotion, turning to face her with tears in his eyes that he made no attempt to hide. "Your daughter, she just—" He stopped, running his hands through his hair, struggling to comprehend the magnitude of what had just occurred. The relief was overwhelming, but so was the awe at witnessing something that seemed to transcend normal human capability. "She may have just saved my company. Hell, she may have just saved my life." "I don't understand," Maria said, moving protectively closer to Emma, placing her hands on her daughter's shoulders in a gesture that was both loving and defensive. What could Emma possibly know about business and computers? She's just a little girl. The money I thought was gone, most of it was never actually lost. It was hidden by a mathematical error in our accounting software. An error so sophisticated, so buried in layers of legitimate calculations, that my entire financial team missed it. The FBI forensic accountants missed it. The external auditors, with their decades of experience and advanced degrees, missed it. Marcus looked at Emma with something approaching awe, as if he were seeing her for the first time. But she saw it in minutes. Emma tugged gently on Marcus's shirt, her expression serious but somehow pleased, like a child who had successfully completed a difficult task for a beloved adult. "Are the numbers happy now?" Marcus knelt to her level, fighting back tears he didn't fully understand, tears of relief, of gratitude, of wonder at the miracle that had just unfolded in his modest apartment. The emotional weight of the past months began to lift from his shoulders like a physical burden being removed. "Yes, sweetheart, the numbers are much happier now. You made them tell the truth." But even as relief flooded through him, Marcus grappled with the impossibility of what had just occurred. Emma Rodriguez was 7 years old. She lived in a small apartment with her mother, attended an underfunded public school where resources were scarce and class sizes were large, and had just demonstrated an understanding of complex financial systems that most adults with MBAs from prestigious universities couldn't match. She had looked at months of data that had stumped teams of experts and found the single error that explained everything. "How?" he asked her gently, his voice filled with genuine wonder. "How did you know where to look?" Emma shrugged, as if the question puzzled her, as if the answer should be obvious to everyone. Her expression was that of a child who couldn't understand why something so simple had been so difficult for the adults to see. The pattern was broken, like when you try to build something, but one piece doesn't fit right. So the whole thing falls down. I could see where it didn't fit. The numbers wanted to be fixed. They were tired of being wrong. Her explanation was simple, almost childlike in its directness, but it revealed a way of thinking that was fundamentally different from conventional problem-solving approaches. Where others had seen complexity, she had seen simplicity. Where others had seen chaos, she had seen a pattern waiting to be corrected. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Marcus Wellington's modest apartment as he paced back and forth, his phone pressed to his ear like a lifeline. 24 hours had passed since Emma's discovery, and the financial world was about to be turned upside down. His hands shook slightly as he spoke, the magnitude of the situation still overwhelming him, still too incredible to fully process even after a sleepless night of running calculations and double-checking Emma's work. "Yes, I understand your skepticism, David, Marcus said to his former chief financial officer, who had reluctantly agreed to review the findings after Marcus's desperate late-night phone call. David Morrison had been with the company for 8 years, had an MBA from Wharton, and possessed the kind of analytical mind that could dissect complex financial instruments with surgical precision. But I need you to run the numbers one more time. Use the corrected algorithm. And David, prepare yourself for what you're about to see. Emma sat at the small dining table, coloring in a book that featured complex geometric patterns rather than the cartoon characters most children her age preferred. Her small tongue poked out slightly in concentration as she created intricate mathematical designs in the margins, patterns that looked suspiciously like financial flow charts. Though she'd never seen one before yesterday, there was something almost meditative about the way she worked, as if the act of creating order from chaos was as natural to her as breathing. Her mother watched nervously from the kitchen, still struggling to comprehend how their quiet life had suddenly intersected with high finance and corporate recovery. Maria had barely slept, alternating between pride in her daughter's extraordinary abilities and fear of what this might mean for their simple, predictable existence. She'd spent the night researching child prodigies on her phone, trying to understand what was happening to her little girl, whether this was normal or if Emma needed some kind of special help. "Sir," David's voice came through the speaker, tight with disbelief and growing excitement. "I'm looking at these projections and, Jesus, Marcus, if these numbers are accurate, Wellington Industries isn't just solvent, it's positioned for massive growth. The subsidiary that we thought was hemorrhaging money, it's actually been generating substantial profits that were being misreported due to the algorithmic error. We're looking at potential revenues that could exceed our best year by 40%. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders that he'd carried for months. The sensation was almost physical, as if someone had removed a boulder from his chest, and he could breathe freely for the first time since Robert's betrayal had come to light. The error was in the subsidiary accounting algorithm. It was treating certain assets as liabilities and vice versa. Every projection, every financial statement for the past 8 months has been essentially backwards. We've been making decisions based on false information. But who found this? Our entire team missed it, the external auditors missed it, even the FBI investigators missed it during their forensic accounting review. Hell, I've got an MBA from Wharton, 20 years of experience in corporate finance, and I stared at these numbers for weeks without seeing it. I had 3 other analysts review it independently, and none of us caught this. Marcus looked at Emma, who was now creating intricate mathematical patterns in the margins of her coloring book, patterns that seemed to flow and connect like neural networks, like the very algorithms that governed modern finance. There was something almost mystical about the way her mind worked, as if she could perceive dimensions of reality that remained hidden from ordinary people. "A consultant," Marcus said carefully, not ready to explain that his savior was a 7-year-old girl with an inexplicable gift for seeing patterns that eluded trained professionals. The world wasn't ready for that conversation, and he wasn't sure he was either. Someone with a fresh perspective. Well, whoever it was deserves a Nobel Prize in economics. Marcus, do you understand what this means? The investors who pulled out in panic, the employees who were laid off, the contracts that were cancelled, all based on false information. We can rebuild this company stronger than it ever was. We can bring back every employee with raises, expand into new markets, invest in research and development. This changes everything. I understand perfectly. Marcus felt his confidence returning for the first time in months, the familiar thrill of possibility coursing through his veins like electricity. The future, that had seemed impossibly dark just 24 hours ago, was suddenly bright with potential. I need you to call an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. And David, we're going to need to discuss significant changes to our organization. Changes that will ensure something like this never happens again. After hanging up, Marcus sat across from Emma, watching as she created mathematical art with the unconscious ease of someone born to see patterns others missed. There was something almost mystical about the way her mind worked, as if she could perceive dimensions of reality that remained hidden from ordinary people. "Emma," he said gently, his voice filled with a mixture of gratitude and wonder, "do you know that what you did yesterday was very special? You solved a problem that many very smart adults couldn't solve." Emma looked up from her coloring, considering his words with the seriousness she brought to everything. Her brown eyes held a depth that seemed far beyond her 7 years, as if she carried some ancient wisdom that had been temporarily housed in the body of a child. It wasn't hard. The numbers wanted to be fixed. They were tired of being wrong, tired of making people sad. They just needed someone to listen to what they were really saying instead of what people thought they were saying. Marcus felt tears prick his eyes as he looked at this extraordinary child who had appeared in his life at the exact moment when hope seemed lost. Emma Rodriguez had given him more than a second chance at business success. She had shown him that sometimes the most profound solutions come from the most unexpected sources, and that wisdom doesn't always come with age or experience. Sometimes it comes in the form of a 7-year-old girl with the remarkable ability to see truth where others see only confusion. The emergency board meeting convened at 8 in the morning in the gleaming conference room of Wellington Industries' downtown headquarters. Marcus Wellington stood at the head of the polished mahogany table, facing 12 skeptical board members who had reluctantly agreed to this meeting. The same men and women who had watched his empire crumble now sat with crossed arms and doubtful expressions, their faith in his leadership shattered by months of financial catastrophe. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to reveal, "what I'm about to show you will change everything you think you know about our company's financial situation." Board Chairman William Hayes, a silver-haired man in his 70s who had invested heavily in Wellington Industries from its inception, leaned forward with barely concealed skepticism. "Marcus, we've seen the forensic accounting reports. We know about Robert's embezzlement. The FBI's investigation found exactly what we expected to find. What could you possibly have discovered that teams of experts missed?" Marcus clicked the remote, and the wall-mounted display screen filled with corrected financial projections. The numbers told a story so dramatically different from their previous reports that several board members gasped audibly. Where months of devastating losses had been projected, the screen now showed substantial profits and growth potential that exceeded their most optimistic previous forecasts. "The algorithmic error in our subsidiary accounting system has been identified and corrected," Marcus announced, watching as understanding dawned on their faces. "The computational mistake was so sophisticated that it went undetected for 8 months, systematically misreporting our actual financial performance." Dr. Patricia Chen, the board's financial oversight specialist, leaned forward in her chair, her expression shifting from skepticism to intense interest. "Marcus, these numbers, if they're accurate, we're not just talking about corporate recovery. We're talking about unprecedented growth potential. But how was this error discovered when multiple audit teams missed it?" Marcus hesitated, knowing that the truth would sound impossible. A consultant with a unique analytical perspective identified the pattern that had eluded our traditional approaches. The room erupted in whispered conversations as board members began to grasp the implications. Wellington Industries wasn't dying. It was poised to become stronger than ever. The employees who had been laid off could be rehired with better compensation packages. The investors who had fled could be courted back with demonstrable proof of the company's actual value. "Who is this consultant?" Hayes demanded. "We need to verify these findings independently before we make any decisions." "The methodology has already been verified by our chief financial officer and will be reviewed by external auditors this week," Marcus replied carefully. "What matters now is that we act quickly to capitalize on this discovery and rebuild the confidence we've lost." But even as the board members began to discuss restoration plans and investor relations strategies, Marcus's mind wandered to the small apartment where a 7-year-old girl was probably getting ready for school, completely unaware that she had just saved a $500 million corporation. Emma Rodriguez had given him more than a second chance. She had performed what could only be described as a miracle. As the meeting progressed and excitement built around the conference table, Marcus realized that his life had been forever changed by an encounter with pure genius in its most unexpected form. But he also knew that Emma's story was just beginning, and that her extraordinary gift would need careful protection and nurturing in a world that wasn't always kind to those who saw things differently. The question that haunted him as he watched his board members celebrate their company's resurrection was simple but profound. What responsibility did he now have to the remarkable child who had saved everything he'd worked to build? 3 days after the board meeting, Marcus Wellington found himself standing outside Riverside Elementary School, watching children pour out of the building in the chaotic exodus that marked the end of another school day. The building was older, its brick facade weathered, and its playground equipment showing signs of heavy use. But there was an energy and life to the place that his expensive private schools had somehow lacked. He spotted Emma immediately. She walked differently from the other children, more purposefully, carrying her heavy backpack as if it contained treasures rather than textbooks. While other 7-year-olds ran and shouted and played, Emma moved with a quiet dignity that set her apart, her observant brown eyes taking in details that others missed. "Mr. Wellington?" Emma's face lit up with genuine surprise and pleasure when she noticed him waiting by the school fence. "What are you doing here?" "I wanted to talk to you about something important," Marcus said, kneeling to her level. "Your mother knows I'm here. I called her at work. Is there somewhere we can sit and talk?" Emma nodded solemnly and led him to a small bench in the school's courtyard, away from the chaos of children being picked up by parents and boarding buses. She settled beside him with the seriousness of someone much older, her small hands folded in her lap. "Emma, do you understand what happened when you looked at my computer?" Marcus asked gently. "I fixed the numbers that were making you sad," she replied simply. "They were telling lies, so I helped them tell the truth." Marcus felt his chest tighten with emotion. The innocence of her explanation contrasted sharply with the sophisticated mathematical analysis she had performed. "What you did saved my company, Emma. It saved the jobs of thousands of people, but more than that, it showed me something I'd never seen before." Emma tilted her head, her expression curious but patient. "You have a gift, Emma. A very special ability to see patterns and solve problems that most people can't see. It's extraordinary and rare, and it means you're going to be able to do amazing things in your life." "Mama says I'm different," Emma said quietly. "She says it's good to be different, but sometimes different makes people uncomfortable." "Your mother is very wise," Marcus replied. "Being different can be challenging, especially when you're young. But Emma, I want to offer you and your mother something that might help you use your gift in wonderful ways." Emma's eyes widened with interest. "How would you feel about going to a special school? A place where other children like you, children who are very smart and see the world in unique ways, can learn together. A place where being different isn't just accepted, it's celebrated." "Would Mama come too?" Emma asked, her first concern characteristically focused on her mother's well-being. "Your mother wouldn't go to school with you, but she'd be nearby, and she'd be able to stop working so hard because we'd take care of everything. Your education, your housing, everything your family needs." Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing this information with the careful consideration she brought to all important decisions. "Would I still be able to help fix broken numbers when people need help?" Marcus smiled, struck by her instinctive desire to use her abilities to help others. "Emma, I think helping people solve problems is exactly what you were meant to do. This school would teach you how to help even more people in even bigger ways." "Can I think about it?" Emma asked. "I need to talk to Mama about big decisions." "Of course," Marcus said, standing, as he saw Maria's car pulling into the pickup area. "But Emma, there's something else I want you to know. You saved my life when you fixed those numbers. Not just my business, my life. I was giving up hope, and you showed me that sometimes the most amazing solutions come from the most unexpected places." As Emma ran toward her mother's car, Marcus watched her go with a mixture of admiration and responsibility. This remarkable child had appeared in his life like an answer to a prayer he hadn't known he was praying. Now it was his turn to make sure she had every opportunity to develop her extraordinary gifts. But he also knew that protecting and nurturing a child prodigy would require more wisdom than he possessed alone. Emma's future would need to be built carefully, with love and patience and respect for both her incredible abilities and her fundamental need to remain a happy, healthy child. The Hartford Academy for Gifted Students, nestled among rolling hills an hour outside Seattle, its Georgian architecture and manicured grounds speaking of academic excellence and tradition. Marcus Wellington walked beside Maria and Emma Rodriguez as they toured the campus, watching Emma's eyes widen with wonder at the advanced laboratories, the extensive library, and the classrooms where children her age were discussing concepts that most high school students never encountered. "The student-to-teacher ratio is 6-to-1, explained Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the Academy's director, a warm woman in her 50s who had dedicated her career to nurturing exceptional young minds. Each child receives an individualized curriculum designed around their particular gifts and interests." Emma had been quiet during most of the tour, absorbing everything with the intense focus she brought to new experiences. But in the mathematics building, she had come alive, asking questions about advanced calculus and number theory that had impressed even the veteran teachers they encountered. "What do you think, Miha?" Maria asked softly as they sat in Dr. Mitchell's office, discussing enrollment procedures and scholarship arrangements that Marcus had privately arranged to fund completely. "The other children seem happy," Emma observed thoughtfully, "and they understand things the way I do. At my school, I have to pretend I don't know the answers sometimes, so the other kids don't feel bad." Dr. Mitchell nodded knowingly. "That's a common experience for gifted children. Here, Emma, you'll never have to hide your intelligence or slow down your learning. In fact, we encourage our students to explore their curiosity as far as it will take them." Marcus watched the interplay between mother and daughter, understanding the magnitude of the decision they were facing. Maria had built her life around caring for Emma, working multiple jobs to provide for her daughter's needs. The idea of Emma attending a residential academy, even one as welcoming as Hartford, meant a fundamental change in their relationship. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Dr. Mitchell continued gently, "we understand that this is a difficult transition for families. We have excellent family housing available on campus for parents who want to be close to their children. Many of our families choose this option, especially during the first year." Maria's relief was visible. "I couldn't bear to be separated from Emma. She's still just 7 years old, no matter how smart she is." "Of course she is," Dr. Mitchell agreed warmly. "Intelligence doesn't accelerate emotional development. Emma would be in our youngest cohort, with other children her age who happen to be intellectually advanced. We believe strongly in nurturing the whole child, emotional, social, and intellectual development together." Emma suddenly spoke up, her young voice clear and certain. "I want to try it, Mama, but only if you're happy about it too." Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. Even in a moment of potential life-changing opportunity, Emma's first concern was her mother's happiness. The love between them was evident in every glance, every gentle touch, every consideration for each other's feelings. "There's something else I want to discuss," Marcus said carefully. "Emma's gift goes beyond normal intellectual giftedness. What she did with my company's financial analysis was unprecedented. I think she might benefit from opportunities to apply her abilities to real-world problems with appropriate guidance and protection." Dr. Mitchell leaned forward with interest. We do have a program for students with exceptional practical application abilities. It's carefully structured to ensure that children aren't exploited or overwhelmed, but it allows them to use their gifts to make meaningful contributions to society. Would that make me different, even from the different kids? Emma asked with the directness that characterized all her questions. It would make you special among special people, Dr. Mitchell replied honestly. But Emma, being exceptional is not a burden when you're surrounded by people who understand and support you. As they concluded the meeting and walked back toward the parking area, Emma slipped her small hand into Marcus's larger one. Mr. Wellington, if I come to this school and learn more about fixing broken things, will you let me help other people the way I helped you? Marcus squeezed her hand gently. Emma, I think helping people is exactly what you were meant to do. But first, you need to learn and grow and be a kid. The world's problems will still be there when you're ready to tackle them. As they drove back toward the city, Emma pressed her face to the window, watching the academy's buildings disappear behind them. For the first time in her young life, she had glimpsed a future where her extraordinary mind wouldn't be something to hide or apologize for, but something to celebrate and develop. The possibilities stretched before her like an equation waiting to be solved. Beautiful and complex and full of promise. 6 months later, Emma Rodriguez had transformed from a quiet, overlooked student at an underfunded public school into the youngest member of Hartford Academy's advanced mathematics program. Her reputation had spread quietly through academic circles, a 7-year-old who could solve complex financial modeling problems that stumped graduate students, who saw patterns in data that experienced analysts missed completely. Marcus Wellington had become a regular visitor to the academy, not just as Emma's benefactor, but as someone who had discovered that her abilities extended far beyond simple mathematical computation. She possessed an intuitive understanding of systems, economic, mathematical, even social, that seemed to transcend normal human cognition. "Mr. Wellington is here to see you, Emma," announced Mrs. Patterson, her favorite teacher, as Emma looked up from a quantum physics textbook that would have challenged most college seniors. Emma smiled and carefully marked her place in the book before walking to the visitors' lounge where Marcus waited with an expression of barely contained excitement. "I have something important to discuss with you," Marcus said as Emma settled into the chair across from him. "There's a company in San Francisco, a technology startup, that's facing the same kind of problem you solved for Wellington Industries. The founder reached out to me after hearing about our recovery, and I thought you might be interested in taking a look." Emma's eyes lit up with the particular intensity she got when presented with a challenging problem. "What kind of broken numbers do they have?" "It's more complex than numbers this time," Marcus explained carefully. "They've developed artificial intelligence software for medical diagnosis, but something in their algorithms is producing inconsistent results. Patients aren't getting accurate diagnoses, and the company is facing lawsuits and potential bankruptcy. People could get hurt if the computers give wrong answers about their health," Emma said, her young face serious with concern. "Exactly. But Emma, this would be different from what you did for my company. This would involve traveling to California, working with adult professionals who might not understand how young you are, and the pressure would be intense. People's lives could depend on getting it right." Emma was quiet for a long moment, her extraordinary mind processing not just the technical challenge, but the ethical implications of her involvement. At 7 years old, she was already grappling with questions of responsibility and purpose that most adults never confronted. "Would Mama come with me?" she asked finally. "Of course. Your mother would be with you every step of the way, and Dr. Mitchell has agreed to provide additional support to ensure that your education continues and that you're not overwhelmed by adult responsibilities." "Mr. Wellington," Emma said carefully, "when I fixed your numbers, I felt happy because I made the sadness go away. If I can help doctors take better care of sick people, that would make me even happier. But I'm still learning lots of things, and sometimes I get scared when too many adults are looking at me." Marcus felt a surge of protective instinct toward this remarkable child who carried such extraordinary gifts with such grace. Emma, you would never be alone or unprotected, and if at any point you felt uncomfortable or wanted to stop, we would stop immediately. Your well-being comes first, always. Emma nodded solemnly. I want to try to help, but I need to understand the problem completely before I can see how to fix it. Sometimes broken things look simple, but they're really complicated inside. That's exactly the kind of thinking that makes you so special, Marcus replied. The company's technical team has been working on this problem for months. They've brought in consultants from MIT and Stanford, but I have a feeling that you'll see something they've all missed. As they discussed the logistics of the California trip, Marcus reflected on how much his life had changed since Emma had walked into his apartment and saved his company. She had given him more than financial recovery. She had shown him a new purpose, a way to use his resources and connections to nurture and protect extraordinary talent while helping solve problems that mattered. Emma Rodriguez was no longer just the cleaning lady's daughter who had stumbled onto an accounting error. She was emerging as something unprecedented, a child prodigy whose gifts could change lives and whose wisdom seemed to grow stronger with each challenge she faced. But she was also still a 7-year-old girl who needed protection, guidance, and the freedom to be young while developing her extraordinary abilities. The balance between nurturing her gifts and preserving her childhood would be delicate, but Marcus was determined to help her navigate that path with love, respect, and unwavering support. The MedTech Solutions headquarters in Palo Alto buzzed with nervous energy as word spread that the mysterious consultant who had saved Wellington Industries was arriving to examine their failing artificial intelligence diagnostic system. Dr. James Crawford, the company's founder and CEO, paced his corner office while his technical team prepared presentation materials they hoped would adequately explain their crisis to whoever Marcus Wellington was bringing to help them. "She's here," announced Rebecca Liu, the head of software development, as she knocked on Crawford's door. "But James, there's something you need to know. The consultant is, well, she's a child, 7 years old." Crawford stopped pacing, certain he had misheard. "I'm sorry. What did you say?" "The girl who supposedly identified the error that saved Wellington Industries is 7 years old. She's here with her mother and Marcus Wellington, and apparently she's some kind of mathematical prodigy." In the conference room, Emma Rodriguez sat calmly beside her mother, studying a tablet displaying MedTech's diagnostic algorithm code with the same intense focus she brought to her advanced mathematics textbooks at Hartford Academy. Marcus watched the technical team file in, their expressions ranging from skepticism to bewilderment as they took in the sight of this small child who was supposedly going to solve their multi-million-dollar crisis. "Ladies and gentlemen," Crawford began awkwardly, "I understand we have a unique consulting situation today. Emma, is it? I'm Dr. Crawford, and I want you to know how grateful we are that you're here to help us." Emma looked up from the tablet, her brown eyes serious and focused. "Dr. Crawford, your computer program is supposed to help doctors figure out what's wrong with sick people, but sometimes it gives wrong answers. Is that right?" "That's essentially correct," Crawford replied, surprised by her directness and the mature way she framed the problem. "Our AI diagnostic system has been producing inconsistent results, and we can't determine why. May I see the pictures and numbers that your computer looks at when it tries to help the doctors?" Emma asked. Rebecca Liu stepped forward, setting up a presentation that displayed medical imaging data and the corresponding diagnostic outputs. "This is a sample of chest X-rays with our AI's diagnostic recommendations. As you can see, similar images are producing wildly different diagnostic suggestions." Emma studied the screens with the intense concentration that had become her trademark, her young mind processing information at a rate that seemed to defy normal human cognitive limitations. The room fell silent as she examined case after case, her small fingers occasionally pointing to details on the screen that the adults had overlooked. "The computer is looking at the wrong things," Emma announced after 20 minutes of careful study. "It's like when I look at a picture and see a dog, but someone teaches me to call it a cat. After that, every time I see a dog, I get confused because I was taught the wrong name." "Doctor." Crawford leaned forward, intrigued despite his initial skepticism. "Can you explain what you mean?" "Your computer learned to recognize sickness by looking at thousands of pictures, but some of the pictures it learned from had the wrong labels. So now, when it sees something that looks like those wrong pictures, it gets confused and gives wrong answers." The technical team exchanged glances. What Emma was describing sounded like a fundamental problem with their training dataset, the foundation upon which their entire AI system had been built. "But there's another problem too," Emma continued, scrolling through more diagnostic examples. "The computer is trying to see too many things at once. When I try to solve a really hard math problem, I break it into smaller pieces. But your computer is trying to solve everything all at once, so it gets overwhelmed and makes mistakes." Rebecca Liu sat down heavily in her chair. "She's describing both corrupted training data and an overly complex algorithmic architecture. We've been looking for a single point of failure when we actually have systemic issues at multiple levels." Emma nodded seriously. "It's like when something is broken in lots of places, but everyone keeps trying to fix just one piece. You have to fix all the broken pieces, or it won't work right." Over the next 2 hours, Emma walked the MedTech team through a systematic analysis of their diagnostic system, identifying not just the corrupted training data, but also architectural flaws that had been invisible to their team of PhD-level engineers. Her insights were delivered in simple, childlike language, but the mathematical concepts underlying her observations were sophisticated beyond anything they had expected. As the meeting concluded and plans were made to implement Emma's recommendations, Dr. Crawford approached Marcus privately. "I don't understand what I just witnessed," he said quietly. "That child just solved problems that have stumped some of the brightest minds in Silicon Valley. How is this possible?" Marcus looked across the room at Emma, who was now coloring in a book while her mother spoke with Rebecca Liu about implementation timelines. "I've stopped trying to understand how it's possible," he replied. "I just know that she has a gift that needs to be protected and nurtured, and that when she uses that gift to help people, extraordinary things happen." 1 year after Emma Rodriguez first walked into Marcus Wellington's modest apartment and changed both their lives forever, she stood before a gathering of the nation's leading mathematicians, computer scientists, and business leaders at the annual Innovation Summit in Chicago. At 8 years old, she had become something unprecedented, a child whose extraordinary analytical abilities had saved 2 major corporations and established new paradigms for problem-solving in complex systems. "When I first look at broken numbers or confused computers," Emma began, her young voice clear and confident despite the intimidating audience, "I try to understand why they're sad or scared. Numbers and computers aren't really different from people. They work better when they feel safe and understood." The audience of adults listened with rapt attention as this remarkable child explained her approach to analytical problem-solving. Her presentation was simple but profound, illustrated with hand-drawn diagrams that reduced complex mathematical concepts to their fundamental components. Marcus Wellington sat in the front row beside Maria Rodriguez, watching with pride and wonder as Emma fielded questions from some of the brightest minds in academia and industry. The transformation in both mother and daughter over the past year had been remarkable. Maria now worked as Hartford Academy's family liaison coordinator, helping other parents navigate the challenges of raising gifted children. Emma had blossomed in an environment that celebrated rather than concealed her abilities. "Miss Rodriguez," asked Dr. Patricia Wynne, a mathematics professor from MIT, "how do you know when you've found the real problem instead of just a symptom?" Emma considered the question with the seriousness she brought to all intellectual challenges. It's like when you're sick and your head hurts, but the real problem is that you need glasses. The headache is real, but it's not the thing that needs to be fixed. When I look at broken systems, I try to find the place where everything else makes sense if you fix that one thing. The simplicity of her explanation belied the sophisticated understanding it represented. Emma had developed an intuitive grasp of systems, thinking that typically required years of graduate-level study to acquire. After her presentation, Emma was surrounded by researchers and business leaders eager to understand her unique approach to problem analysis. But Marcus noticed how she handled the attention, graciously but with clear boundaries, always deflecting praise to focus on the practical applications of her insights. "Mr. Wellington," Emma said as they walked back to their hotel that evening, "I think I understand now why you wanted me to come to this meeting." "Oh, what do you think you understand?" "You wanted me to see that there are lots of people working on important problems, and that maybe my way of seeing things could help them too. But you also wanted me to know that being different doesn't mean being alone." Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. "You're very perceptive, Emma. What do you think about all of this, about the opportunities that are opening up for you?" Emma was quiet for a moment, processing the question with the careful consideration she brought to all important decisions. "I think I want to keep learning and growing. And I want to help people solve problems that matter, but I also want to stay close to Mama and have time to be a kid and play sometimes." "Those things aren't mutually exclusive," Marcus assured her. "In fact, I think maintaining balance is essential for someone with your gifts. The world needs what you can offer, but it needs you to be healthy and happy too." As they reached the hotel, Emma looked up at Marcus with an expression of mature gratitude that seemed far beyond her 8 years. "Mr. Wellington, thank you for believing in me and for helping Mama and me find a good life. I know I'm different, but you help me understand that different can be wonderful instead of scary." Marcus knelt to her level, thinking about the journey that had brought them to this moment. "Emma, you saved my company and my faith in the future. But more than that, you've shown me that sometimes the most profound wisdom comes in the most unexpected packages. The world is better because you're in it, and I'm honored to be part of your story." As Emma hugged him goodnight and headed to her room with her mother, Marcus reflected on the extraordinary year that had transformed them all. Emma Rodriguez had evolved from a quiet, overlooked child into a recognized prodigy whose insights were changing how people approached complex problems. But she had managed this transformation while maintaining her essential kindness, her concern for others, and her childlike wonder at the world around her. The future stretched before them all, full of possibilities and challenges that none of them could fully anticipate. But Marcus knew that whatever came next, Emma would face it with the same remarkable combination of intellectual brilliance and emotional wisdom that had characterized everything she had accomplished so far. She had shown him that genius wasn't just about intelligence. It was about the courage to see truth where others saw only confusion, and the compassion to use that vision in service of something greater than oneself. The little girl who had once stood in his apartment and declared that the numbers were crying had grown into someone who could make the whole world listen. And Marcus Wellington, former fallen corporate titan turned guardian of extraordinary talent, couldn't wait to see what miracles she would perform next. Millionaire loses his 13 fortune and goes bankrupt, and his wife kicks him out until an 8-year-old orphan girl says something that changes everything. Before we reveal this heart-rending story of solitude and sorrow, share where you're watching from and subscribe for more moving tales. The cold marble floor of the Manhattan penthouse felt like ice against Richard Montgomery's knees as he stared at the federal seizure notice in his trembling hands. 58 years old, and everything he'd built over 3 decades was gone. $13 billion vanished. "Get out." Victoria's voice cut through the silence like a blade. His wife of 22 years stood in the doorway, her designer heels clicking against the marble as she approached. "The FBI finished their sweep an hour ago. This penthouse, the cars, the accounts, all frozen. Richard looked up at the woman he'd loved since she was 28, her blonde hair perfectly styled, even in this chaos. "Vicky, we can fight this. My lawyers say—" "Your lawyers?" She laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "Richard, you're bankrupt. Worse than bankrupt. You're toxic. I filed for divorce this morning." The words hit him like a physical blow. 22 years, Victoria. 22 years we built this life together. I built nothing. She turned away, her voice cold as winter. I married a successful man. That man no longer exists. The next 3 hours blurred together. Security escorted him out with a single suitcase. The Bentley, the driver, the credit cards, all gone. Richard Montgomery, once worth $13 billion, stood on Fifth Avenue with $700 in cash and nowhere to go. By evening, he found himself in Queens, at the only place his remaining pride would allow, St. Catherine's Children's Home, where he'd volunteered every Christmas for the past 5 years. Maybe Sister Margaret would let him sleep in the volunteer quarters, just until he could figure out his next move. The November rain had started, soaking through his $1,000 suit as he approached the brick building. Through the windows, he could see children gathered in the common room, their laughter a stark contrast to the storm raging in his chest. "Mr. Richard!" a small voice called out as he entered. 7-year-old Emma ran toward him, her dark curls bouncing. She'd been at St. Catherine's for 3 years, since her grandmother died. Unlike the other children, Emma had never seemed interested in being adopted. She preferred books and quiet conversations with the adults. "Hello, sweetheart." Richard forced a smile, kneeling to her level. "What are you doing up so late?" Emma's brown eyes studied his face with an intensity that always surprised him. "Sister Margaret said you might not come anymore because of troubles. Are you sad, Mr. Richard?" The question broke something inside him. This child, who had lost everything herself, was worried about him. "Yes, Emma, I am very sad." She nodded solemnly. "When I'm sad, I remember what my grandmama told me. She said sometimes the worst things happen because someone wants them to happen, not because they just happen." Richard frowned. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Emma glanced around, then stepped closer. "I saw your wife here once, 3 months ago. She talked to Mr. Harrison in his office for a long time. The world seemed to tilt. David Harrison was the director of St. Catherine's, but more importantly, he was Victoria's brother. Richard had never connected the two. Victoria had kept her maiden name, and Harrison was their mother's remarried surname. "Emma, are you certain?" "Too." Emma nodded gravely. She was very angry. "I heard her say your name through the door when I was walking past. She said something about making sure he loses everything, and the plan has to work perfectly." Richard's heart pounded. "What else did you hear?" "She said something about papers and a man named Blackwood, and that she'd been moving money somewhere safe." Emma's voice dropped to a whisper. "She scared me, Mr. Richard. She sounded mean. James Blackwood, Richard's former business partner who'd sold his shares 6 months ago claiming he wanted to retire. The same James Blackwood whose company had mysteriously received several major contracts that should have gone to Montgomery Industries." "Emma, this is very important. Did you see anything else? Papers, maybe?" She had a big folder. She left without it. Emma bit her lip. "Mr. Harrison was upset after. He put the folder in his safe, the one behind the painting of Jesus." Sister Margaret appeared in the doorway. "Emma, you should be in bed. Mr. Montgomery, I heard about your situation. You're welcome to stay in the volunteer quarters tonight." As Sister Margaret led Emma away, the little girl turned back. "Mr. Richard, my grandmama also said that when bad people hurt good people, God makes sure the truth comes out. You just have to be patient and pay attention." That night, Richard lay awake in the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling. Victoria's behavior over the past months suddenly made sense. The separate bedroom, claiming he worked too much, her insistence on handling their personal finances, the way she'd encouraged him to expand the business faster, take bigger risks, and David Harrison. Victoria's brother, who'd always been friendly, who'd known every detail of Richard's business through their Christmas conversations, who had access to Richard's personal information through Victoria. At 3 a.m., Richard made his decision. He dressed quietly and slipped out of his room. The building was silent except for the heating system's gentle hum. He'd been volunteering here for 5 years. He knew every creaking floorboard to avoid. Harrison's office was on the ground floor. Richard had watched the director open his safe multiple times during budget meetings, always turning his body to block the view. But Richard had sharp eyes, honed by decades of business negotiations. The combination was Emma's birthday, the date Harrison had sentimentally chosen when she'd arrived, claiming she reminded him of his own daughter. The safe opened with a soft click. Inside were financial documents, adoption records, and there, a thick folder marked Montgomery Industries, private. Richard's hands shook as he opened it. The contents were devastating. Bank routing numbers for accounts in Switzerland and the Cayman Islands, forged documents showing fictional business deals. Most damning of all, a contract between Victoria Montgomery and James Blackwood, dated 8 months ago, outlining their plan to systematically drain Montgomery Industries' assets while positioning Blackwood's company to absorb the client base. But the final page made his blood run cold. It was a memo in Victoria's handwriting. Phase 3. Once bankruptcy is complete and assets seized, wait 6 months, then liquidate offshore accounts. Estimated total $8. $2 billion, split 60-40 as agreed. Victoria hadn't just left him. She'd orchestrated his complete destruction while stealing over $8 billion. Money that would eventually surface in accounts she controlled, looking like wise investments made before their divorce. A sound in the hallway made Richard freeze. Footsteps. He quickly photographed every page with his phone, returned the folder, and closed the safe. The footsteps passed by the office door. As dawn broke over Queens, Richard sat in the children's home chapel, the evidence of his wife's betrayal glowing on his phone screen. 22 years of marriage, 22 years of what he'd thought was love. Emma appeared beside him, carrying a worn teddy bear. "Did you find what you were looking for, Mr. Richard?" He looked at this remarkable child who'd given him the key to his salvation. "Yes, sweetheart. I found exactly what I needed." "Good." She climbed onto the pew beside him. "Now what are you going to do?" Richard Montgomery, who 12 hours ago had nothing, now had something more valuable than money. He had the truth. And he had a 7-year-old guardian angel who delivered it to him. "Now, Emma, we're going to make sure the bad people face justice." 03. 3 days later, Richard sat in a cramped legal aid office in downtown Brooklyn, facing attorney Sarah Chen. At 35, she was young, overworked, and initially skeptical of the disheveled man claiming to be a former billionaire. But the evidence on Richard's phone had changed everything. "This is unprecedented," Sarah said, reviewing the photographs for the 3rd time. "Your wife essentially conducted the largest theft in New York history while framing you for financial crimes you didn't commit." Richard nodded. He'd been staying at a YMCA in Queens, his $700 now down to $400. "The FBI agents who seized my assets, they never looked for offshore accounts because they assumed all the money was lost in bad investments. Victoria made sure they saw exactly what she wanted them to see. The problem is proving these documents are authentic. Harrison could claim they're forgeries or that his safe was compromised." Sarah leaned back in her chair. "We need corroborating evidence." "What kind of evidence?" "Bank records, communication between your wife and Blackwood, witnesses to their meetings, something that proves this conspiracy existed before your company collapsed." Richard's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Mr. Richard, Sister Margaret says you're in trouble with lawyers. I remember something else about the mean lady. Can you come to the home? Emma." 20 minutes later, Richard was back at St. Catherine's. Emma waited in the garden, her small hands clutching a notebook. "I remembered something important," she said. The day your wife came, I was hiding because I was reading a book I wasn't supposed to have, but I saw her meet with another man first before she talked to Mr. Harrison. Richard knelt beside her. What did this man look like? Old like you, but with white hair, really white, and he had a scary voice. Emma opened her notebook, revealing a surprisingly detailed pencil drawing. I drew him so I wouldn't forget. The sketch showed a man with distinctive features, sharp cheekbones, thin lips, and piercing eyes. But it was the small scar above the left eyebrow that made Richard's heart race. James Blackwood. He'd gotten that scar in a sailing accident 15 years ago. Emma, where did they meet? In the parking lot, in his black car. They argued about something. The man kept pointing at papers and your wife kept shaking her head. Then she got out and slammed the door really hard. Richard felt pieces clicking into place. Did you hear anything they said? Some words. The man said something about moving too fast and the timeline. Your wife said Richard suspects nothing, and something about Christmas bonuses. Emma frowned. What's a Christmas bonus? Richard almost smiled despite everything. Last Christmas, he'd given every employee a substantial bonus, praising the company's record profits. Profits that, he now realized, were artificially inflated by money being funneled back into the company from accounts Victoria controlled. She'd been fattening the company for slaughter. Emma, this is very important. Do you remember the date this happened? She nodded. August 15th, it was my birthday. Sister Margaret was making my cake, and I was sad because no one was coming to my party except the other kids. Her voice dropped. That's why I was hiding with the book. August 15th. Richard pulled out his phone and scrolled through his calendar. On August 16th, Victoria had suggested they take a second honeymoon to celebrate their success. A trip to Switzerland, where she'd insisted on visiting several banks to explore international investment opportunities. Now he understood. She'd been opening accounts, moving money, setting up the infrastructure for the theft. And he'd been so grateful for her renewed interest in their relationship that he'd given her power of attorney to handle their personal finances while he focused on the business. Mr. Richard? Emma's voice was small. Are you going to be okay? He looked at this extraordinary child who'd already given him more help than anyone else in his life. Emma, would you be willing to tell this story to some other people, people who could help us catch the bad people? Will it help you get your money back? It might help me get something more important than money. It might help me get justice. Emma straightened her small shoulders. Grandmama always said we have to stand up to bullies, even when we're scared. That evening, Richard called Sarah Chen. I have a witness, a 7-year-old girl who can place Victoria and Blackwood together 3 months before my company collapsed, discussing their timeline. A child witness is complicated, but... Sarah paused. Richard, I've been doing some digging. James Blackwood's company received over $200 million in contracts from firms that used to work exclusively with Montgomery Industries, all within the past 6 months. Someone convinced them to switch, or someone with intimate knowledge of your business practices and client relationships systematically undermined your reputation while positioning Blackwood as the better alternative. Sarah's voice hardened. We're not just talking about theft, Richard. This was a calculated campaign to destroy your life. As Richard hung up, he realized that Victoria's betrayal ran deeper than money. She'd stolen his reputation, his relationships, his identity. She'd tried to erase Richard Montgomery completely, but she'd made one mistake. She'd underestimated the power of a 7-year-old girl with a memory like a steel trap, and a grandmother who taught her that justice matters. Richard Montgomery was far from finished. 04. FBI Special Agent Maria Rodriguez had seen many cases in her 15-year career, but the evidence spread across her desk defied belief. The photographs from Harrison's safe, Emma's detailed testimony, and the banking records Sarah Chen had subpoenaed painted a picture of financial conspiracy that reached the highest levels of New York society. Mrs. Montgomery has been very cooperative, Agent Rodriguez told Richard during their second meeting. Perhaps too cooperative. Richard frowned. What do you mean? When we approached her yesterday about your allegations, she immediately provided us with complete financial records, expressed shock and dismay, and offered to help in any way possible. Rodriguez leaned forward. In 30 years of investigating financial crimes, guilty parties don't behave this way. They lawyer up, they deflect, they deny. Your wife acted like someone with nothing to hide. Richard's heart sank. You think she's innocent. I think she's very, very smart. Rodriguez opened a new file. The records she provided show a pattern of you making increasingly erratic financial decisions over the past year. Large cash withdrawals, risky investments, aggressive expansion, all documented with your electronic signature. I never made those decisions. According to the bank records, you did. According to her testimony, she tried to stop you multiple times, but you refused to listen, claiming the business pressures were too intense. Rodriguez's voice was carefully neutral. She even has recordings of arguments where you allegedly dismissed her concern. Richard felt the room spinning. She recorded our private conversations? Apparently, she was gathering evidence for what she anticipated would be a difficult divorce. Very prescient of her. Rodriguez paused. Mr. Montgomery, is it possible that the stress of your business affected your judgment? That you made decisions you don't clearly remember? No. Richard's voice was firm. Agent Rodriguez, I've been making complex financial decisions for 30 years. I don't make 8-figure investments without extensive analysis. Yet the records show you did exactly that, multiple times. Richard stared at the agent. Victoria had been more thorough than he'd imagined. Not only had she stolen his money, she'd created a complete alternate narrative where he was the reckless one, where she was the concerned wife trying to save their marriage and finances. What about the documents Emma saw, the meetings with Blackwood? Mr. Harrison claims his safe was never compromised. He says any documents about Montgomery Industries would have been legitimate financial records from your charitable donations. Rodriguez's tone was sympathetic but firm. As for the child's testimony, Mr. Blackwood has travel records showing he was in London during the dates in question. Richard felt his last hope crumbling. Those records could be falsified. They could be, but proving that requires resources we don't have unless we can establish probable cause for a broader investigation. Rodriguez closed the file. Mr. Montgomery, I believe someone orchestrated your financial ruin, but beliefs aren't evidence. That evening, Richard sat with Emma in St. Catherine's garden. The November cold had deepened, and most of the children were inside watching television. Emma wore a worn winter coat that was too big for her, making her look even smaller. The FBI lady didn't believe us, did she? Emma asked. Richard had tried to keep the disappointment from his voice during their brief conversation. But Emma was perceptive beyond her years. She believes us, sweetheart. She just needs more proof. What kind of proof? The kind that shows your wife is lying about the recordings, about the meetings, about everything. He paused. Emma, when you saw Victoria and Blackwood arguing in the car, you said she got out and slammed the door. What happened next? Emma closed her eyes, concentrating. She walked to the building, but then she turned around and went back to the car. She was carrying something, a big envelope. She leaned in the window and gave it to him. Richard's pulse quickened. An envelope, brown and fat, like the ones Sister Margaret uses for important papers. Emma opened her eyes. The man looked inside it, then nodded. Then your wife came into the building. An exchange of documents, something Victoria had given Blackwood, something important enough to make him travel from London to Queens to receive it personally, despite what his falsified travel records claimed. Emma, I need you to think very carefully. After Victoria went inside, did you see the man again? He didn't leave right away. He sat in his car for a long time, looking at the papers. Then he made a phone call. He was talking loud, angry, loud. I heard some words. What words? Emma's voice dropped to a whisper, mimicking what she'd overheard. She's moving too fast. No, the timing is critical. He's already suspicious about the Swiss accounts. Richard's blood froze. In August, he hadn't known about any Swiss accounts. but Victoria had opened them during their second honeymoon trip, and somehow Blackwood had known about them before they existed. "Emma, are you absolutely certain those were his words?" Grandmama taught me to pay attention to grown-ups when they're angry or scared, because that's when they tell the truth." Emma looked up at him with those wise brown eyes. He was both. Richard pulled out his phone and called Sarah Chen. "Sarah, I need you to subpoena Blackwood's phone records for August 15th. And I need to know if there's any way to prove he was in New York that day, despite his travel records." "Richard, the FBI already looked into..." "The FBI looked at official records. But what if those records are lies? What if someone with access to multiple passports and private jets wanted to create a false alibi?" Sarah was quiet for a moment. "That's a serious accusation. It's a serious crime." Richard looked at Emma, who was listening intently. "Sarah, a 7-year-old girl may have witnessed the moment when two conspirators exchanged the evidence that would destroy my life. We just have to prove she's telling the truth." At 5, Sarah Chen worked through the weekend, calling in favors from private investigators and forensic accountants she'd worked with in previous cases. By Monday morning, she had information that made Richard's heart race. "Blackwood owns 3 passports," Sarah explained over coffee at a diner near St. Catherine's, "British, American and Swiss. On August 15th, his British passport shows he was in London, but his American passport has no entry or exit stamps for that entire week." Richard leaned forward. "Meaning?" "Meaning someone with multiple passports can create false alibis by using different documents for different parts of their travel. If he flew to New York using his American passport and returned to London using his British one, official records would show him continuously in London. Can we prove it?" Sarah nodded grimly. "Private jet manifests don't require the same passport documentation as commercial flights. I found a charter company that flew a J. Blackwell from Teterboro Airport to London on August 15th at 11 p.m. Close enough to J. Blackwood to be a deliberate alias." Richard felt the first spark of hope he'd had in days. What about the phone call Emma overheard? That's where it gets interesting. Sarah pulled out her laptop. Cell phone companies keep detailed records of tower connections, even for calls that don't go through. On August 15th at 4:47 p.m., a number registered to Blackwood's company connected to cell towers in Queens for exactly 12 minutes. The same time, Emma saw him in the parking lot. The same time, she heard him talking about Swiss accounts that wouldn't officially exist for another 3 weeks. Sarah's voice hardened. "Richard, your wife and Blackwood didn't just steal from you. They created an elaborate false narrative to cover their tracks, including falsified travel records and forged business documents." That afternoon, Richard and Sarah met with FBI agent Rodriguez again. This time, the agent's skepticism had vanished. "The phone records are damning," Rodriguez admitted, "but what really caught our attention was the banking analysis. Every reckless investment decision attributed to you was followed within 48 hours by a corresponding deposit into accounts connected to Blackwood's company." Richard felt vindicated, but anger burned in his chest. "So Victoria would forge my electronic signature on a bad investment, then Blackwood would profit from the loss. It's more sophisticated than that." Rodriguez opened her laptop. "The investments weren't random. Each one involved companies that were about to go bankrupt. Your wife somehow knew which firms were about to collapse and convinced you to invest heavily in them just before they failed. How could she know that information? Victoria Montgomery sits on the boards of 3 major investment firms and 2 banks. She had access to confidential information about company health, pending bankruptcies, market manipulation schemes." Rodriguez's tone was flat. "She used insider information to systematically destroy your wealth while enriching her co-conspirators." Sarah leaned forward. "What about the recordings where she claims to have warned Richard about his reckless behavior?" "Audio analysis shows they were edited. Conversations that allegedly took place over several months were actually created from snippets of different phone calls, rearranged to support her narrative." Rodriguez closed the laptop. Mrs. Montgomery is a very sophisticated criminal. That evening, Richard walked through the halls of St. Catherine's, processing the magnitude of what he'd learned. Victoria hadn't just betrayed him. She'd orchestrated one of the most complex financial crimes in modern history, and she'd almost gotten away with it. Emma appeared beside him, carrying her notebook. "Mr. Richard, you look different today, less sad." "The FBI believes us now, sweetheart. They know you were telling the truth." Emma nodded seriously. "Grandmama always said the truth is like water. It finds a way to flow out, even when people try to dam it up. Your grandmama was a wise woman. She also said that when bad people hurt good people, it's not enough just to catch them. You have to make sure they can't hurt anyone else." Emma looked up at him. "Are you going to make sure the mean lady can't hurt other people?" Richard knelt to her level. "Emma, what your grandmother said is very important. This isn't just about getting my money back. Victoria and her friends have probably hurt other people too." "How do you know?" "Because people who can plan something this complicated don't usually do it just once. They practice. They get better at it." Richard's voice hardened. "I think Victoria Montgomery has been destroying lives for years." Emma's eyes widened. "Other people like you? Other people like me. Men and women who trusted the wrong person and lost everything." Richard stood up. "Tomorrow, Emma, we're going to help the FBI find out just how many people Victoria has hurt." As Richard tucked Emma into bed that night, she grabbed his hand. "Mr. Richard, when this is all over, when the bad people are caught, will you still come visit us?" The question hit him unexpectedly. This child, who had given him everything, was worried about being abandoned again. "Emma, sweetheart, I'm not going anywhere. You saved my life. You're the bravest, smartest person I know." He squeezed her small hand. "No matter what happens, you'll always be my guardian angel." Emma smiled sleepily. "Good, because I think you're going to need more help before this is over." Richard had no idea how prophetic those words would prove to be. 06. The FBI raid on Victoria Montgomery's penthouse happened at dawn on a Tuesday morning. Richard wasn't allowed to be present, but Agent Rodriguez called him immediately afterward with news that shook him to his core. "We found evidence of at least 17 other victims," Rodriguez said. "Victoria has been running this scheme for 8 years, targeting wealthy men going through difficult periods, divorces, business troubles, family crises." Richard sat in stunned silence in the St. Catherine's common room, Emma colouring quietly beside him. "The pattern was always the same," Rodriguez continued. "She'd identify vulnerable targets, create romantic relationships, gain access to their finances, then systematically drain their assets while building legal cases to protect herself. 17 other men? 17 we can identify so far. Total theft appears to exceed $42 billion. Rodriguez's voice was grim. "Richard, your wife is one of the most successful con artists in American history." Richard thought about all those times Victoria had seemed to know exactly what to say, exactly how to make him feel better during stressful business periods. How she'd encouraged him to take risks, to trust her with more responsibility, to give her greater access to his financial world. "There's more," Rodriguez said. "We found evidence that she's been planning to disappear. False identities, bank accounts in non-extradition countries, even a house in Paraguay purchased under an assumed name." "When?" "The timeline in her personal notes suggests Christmas. She was going to wait until the holiday season to maximize emotional impact, then vanish with approximately $9 billion. Richard felt sick. On Christmas morning, he would have woken up alone, completely destroyed, while Victoria enjoyed tropical beaches funded by his life's work. "Agent Rodriguez, what happens now?" "Now we build the case. And frankly, Mr. Montgomery, we need your help. You understand the financial details better than anyone, and your testimony will be crucial for the other victims." After hanging up, Richard sat with Emma in the garden. The December cold was bitter, but Emma had insisted they needed thinking air. "The FBI lady sounded excited," Emma observed. "She caught the bad people. That's good news. But you don't sound happy. Richard considered how to explain to a 7-year-old that learning your wife never loved you, that your entire marriage was an elaborate lie, somehow hurt worse than losing the money. Sometimes when you find out the truth, it makes you sad, even when it also makes you free. Emma nodded solemnly. Like when I found out my mommy wasn't coming back, even though people told me she was. The simple parallel hit Richard hard. This child understood betrayal and loss in ways most adults never would. Emma, can I ask you something? Why did you decide to help me that first night? You could have just ignored what you'd seen. Emma was quiet for a long moment, her small hands folded in her lap. After my grandmama died, lots of grown-ups made promises they didn't keep. Social workers, foster families, even some people here, but you always kept your promises. Every Christmas, every birthday, every time you said you'd come back, you came back. She looked up at him with those wise brown eyes. When I saw how sad you were, I thought maybe someone was breaking promises to you too. And I don't like people who break promises to good people. Richard felt tears he hadn't allowed himself to shed throughout this entire ordeal. This child had seen through to his character in a way his wife of 22 years never had. Emma, I have something to tell you. Something important. She straightened, sensing the seriousness in his tone. The FBI is going to arrest Victoria and her friends. There will be trials and legal proceedings, but there's something else. Victoria stole money from lots of people, and when we get it back, I'll have more money than I could ever spend. Emma nodded, not sure where this was leading. I want to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Richard took a deep breath. Emma, would you like to come live with me? Would you like me to adopt you and be your father? Emma's eyes went wide. You mean forever, like a real family? Like a real family. Forever. Emma was quiet for so long. Richard began to worry he'd moved too fast, been too presumptuous. Then she launched herself into his arms with a force that nearly knocked him over. Yes! She whispered fiercely against his shoulder. Yes, yes, yes! As Richard held this remarkable child who had saved his life in every way that mattered, he realized that Victoria's betrayal had given him something she never could have, the chance to build a real family based on love, loyalty, and truth. The legal battles ahead would be complex and painful, but Richard Montgomery was no longer facing them alone. He had Emma, and Emma had him, and together they were going to make sure justice prevailed. 2 weeks later, Richard sat in the Manhattan District Attorney's office, watching Victoria Montgomery enter the room in handcuffs. She looked different, older, her perfectly styled blonde hair now showing grey roots, her designer clothes replaced with an orange jumpsuit. But her eyes still held that calculating coldness he'd learned to recognize too late. Mrs. Montgomery, District Attorney Patricia Wells began. You're facing charges of wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, and racketeering. The evidence against you is overwhelming. Victoria's lawyer, a sharp-faced man named Stevens, leaned forward. My client maintains her innocence. These charges are based on the fantasies of a bitter ex-husband and the unreliable testimony of a disturbed child. Richard felt his jaw clench. Emma wasn't disturbed. She was the sanest person he'd ever met. Let's review the evidence, D.A. Wells continued, opening a thick file. Phone records place your client's co-conspirator, James Blackwood, in Queens on dates when he was supposedly in London. Audio analysis proves your client fabricated recordings to frame her husband, and financial records show a clear pattern of insider trading and fraud spanning 8 years. Stevens remained unmoved. Circumstantial evidence assembled by investigators desperate to close a high-profile case. But Victoria herself had been silent throughout the meeting, studying Richard with those cold blue eyes. Finally, she spoke. Richard looks well, she said, her voice carrying that familiar tone that once made his heart race. Considering he's living in a children's home with his new daughter. The way she said daughter made Richard's blood boil. But before he could respond, Victoria continued. I wonder what the adoption agency will think when they learn about Richard's recent instability. His financial recklessness, his paranoid accusations, his tendency to form inappropriate attachments to vulnerable children. D.A. Wells interrupted. Mrs. Montgomery, anything you say can and will be used against you. Victoria smiled. That same smile that had charmed him for 22 years. I'm not confessing to anything. I'm simply expressing concern for a child's welfare. After all, Richard has demonstrated such poor judgment lately. Who knows what he might do next? Richard understood the threat immediately. Victoria was going to attack his fitness as a father, try to prevent the adoption. Even from jail, she was still trying to destroy everything he loved. That evening, Richard called Sarah Chen from St. Catherine's. Emma was at his side, sensing his distress even though he'd tried to hide it. She can't stop the adoption, can she? Richard asked. It's complicated, Sarah admitted. Your recent financial troubles could be seen as instability, and Victoria's lawyers will argue that your attachment to Emma is unhealthy, a damaged man seeking comfort from a vulnerable child. Richard felt sick. What do? We prove that you're exactly the kind of father Emma needs. And we prove that Victoria's attacks are just another part of her criminal pattern. Emma tugged on Richard's sleeve. Mr. Richard, is the mean lady trying to hurt us again? Richard knelt to her level. She's trying, sweetheart, but she's not going to succeed. How do you know? Because this time, I know what she really is, and I'm not going to let her win. But privately, Richard was terrified. Losing Emma would be worse than losing the money. Victoria had found the one weapon that could still destroy him completely. The next morning brought unexpected news. Agent Rodriguez called with information that changed everything. Richard, we found Victoria's real target list. It wasn't just about stealing money. She was building a network. Each victim she destroyed was connected to other wealthy individuals. She was systematically mapping the financial elite of America. For what purpose? We think she was working for someone else. Someone who wanted detailed intelligence on how America's wealthiest families operate, where their vulnerabilities are, how to bring down the entire system. Richard felt a chill that had nothing to do with the December cold. You're talking about economic espionage. We're talking about financial terrorism. Victoria Montgomery wasn't just a con artist, Richard. She was a foreign asset, and you were her way into the heart of American capitalism. As Richard hung up the phone, he realized that his personal nightmare was part of something much larger and more dangerous. Victoria hadn't just stolen his money, she'd used him to threaten national security. And now she was using Emma to ensure his silence. The courtroom was packed when Victoria Montgomery's trial began in January. Richard sat in the gallery next to Emma, who wore her best dress, a simple blue outfit that Sister Margaret had bought for the occasion. Despite everything, Richard was proud of how composed the 8-year-old looked. Her birthday had passed quietly at St. Catherine's while they waited for the legal proceedings to begin. Victoria's defense team had spent weeks trying to paint Richard as an unstable man whose business failures had driven him to paranoid delusions. They'd called witnesses who testified about his erratic behavior in the months before his company collapsed. Behavior that Richard now understood was his natural response to Victoria's systematic sabotage. But today was different. Today, Emma would testify. Your Honor, Stevens addressed the judge, we object to allowing a child to testify in this complex financial case. The defendant has the right to confront her accusers, and an 8-year-old cannot be considered a reliable witness to sophisticated criminal conspiracy. Judge Harrison, no relation to the Children's Home Director, considered the objection carefully. The witness will be examined in chambers, with only essential personnel present. If I determine her testimony is relevant and reliable, it will be admitted. An hour later, Emma sat in the judge's private office, her small hands folded in her lap. Richard and the lawyers watched as Judge Harrison spoke gently to her. Emma, do you understand the difference between the truth and a lie? Yes, ma'am. The truth is what really happened. A lie is when you say something that didn't happen to help yourself or hurt someone else. And you promise to tell the truth today? I promise. My grandmama said lying makes God sad, and it makes the person lying feel bad inside. Judge Harrison nodded approvingly. For the next 30 minutes, Emma recounted everything she'd witnessed. Victoria's meeting with Blackwood, the angry phone call, the exchange of documents. Her memory was precise, her descriptions detailed, her certainty unwavering. Stevens tried to rattle her. Emma, isn't it true that you don't like Mrs. Montgomery because she took away your friend Mr. Richard? Emma considered this seriously. I don't like Mrs. Montgomery because she's mean and she hurt people, but I didn't know she hurt Mr. Richard until after I saw her being mean at our home. Isn't it possible you imagined some of what you think you saw? No, sir, I have a very good memory. Sister Margaret says I remember things other people forget because I pay attention. Emma's voice was clear and confident. I remember everything about that day because it was my birthday and I was sad. Stevens pressed harder. Emma, has Mr. Richard promised you anything for testifying today? A new home, perhaps? Toys? Special treatment? Emma's brown eyes flashed with something that reminded Richard powerfully of her grandmother's strength. Mr. Richard never promised me anything for telling the truth. He only promised to be my daddy if I wanted him to be. And I want him to be because he's good and kind and he keeps his promises. Judge Harrison called a recess. When court resumed, she announced her decision. The witness's testimony will be admitted. Testimony. Emma Chen demonstrates exceptional recall, consistency, and honesty. Her observations provide crucial evidence of the defendant's conspiracy. Victoria's face remained impassive, but Richard caught the flash of fury in her eyes. That afternoon, the prosecution called its star witness, James Blackwood himself. Facing 40 years in prison, he'd agreed to cooperate fully. Yes, I conspired with Victoria Montgomery to defraud multiple victims over 8 years, Blackwood testified. The operation was sophisticated and international in scope. Who initiated the conspiracy? D.A. Wells asked. Victoria did. She approached me in 2017 with a detailed plan to systematically target wealthy Americans. She had access through her board positions and social connections. I provided the international banking expertise and money laundering capabilities. Was Mrs. Montgomery working alone? Blackwood hesitated, then shook his head. No. Victoria was reporting to a handler, someone she called the director. I never met this person, but Victoria received detailed instructions about which targets to pursue and what information to gather. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Richard felt Emma's small hand slip into his. Mr. Blackwood, are you suggesting this was more than financial crime? I'm saying Victoria Montgomery was conducting economic espionage against the United States. The money was secondary. The primary goal was intelligence gathering about American financial institutions and the wealthy individuals who control them. Richard's worst fears were confirmed. Victoria hadn't just betrayed him personally, she'd used their marriage to betray their entire country. As they left the courthouse that evening, Emma looked up at him thoughtfully. Mr. Richard, does this mean the mean lady is a spy? It means she's worse than we thought, sweetheart. Good. Emma said with satisfaction. Now everyone will know she's really, really bad, and they'll make sure she can't hurt anyone else. Richard hoped his 8-year-old daughter was right, but he had a feeling Victoria Montgomery still had surprises left to reveal. The revelation that Victoria was a foreign asset sent shockwaves through the trial. FBI counterintelligence agents took over the investigation, and Richard found himself in a secure federal facility being debriefed about every detail of his marriage. Think carefully, Mr. Montgomery, Agent Sarah Kim from the FBI's National Security Division urged. In 22 years of marriage, Victoria must have asked questions about your business associates, your clients, your financial strategies. We need to understand exactly what intelligence she gathered. Richard sat across from Agent Kim, feeling the weight of his unwitting betrayal. Emma was in a nearby room, drawing pictures, while a child psychologist ensured she was coping with the stress of the situation. She knew everything, Richard admitted. client lists, investment strategies, personal information about some of America's wealthiest families. She attended every business dinner, every charity gala, every private meeting I had in our home. What about international connections? Did she ever encourage you to pursue business overseas? Richard's blood chilled as memories surfaced. 2 years ago, she suggested I explore opportunities in Eastern Europe. She arranged meetings with investors in Prague, Budapest, Moscow. She said it would be good for our relationship to travel together more. Agent Kim leaned forward. These investors, did Victoria already know them? She claimed she'd met them through her board connections, but Richard paused, remembering. They knew things about me, personal details that I hadn't shared, details that only Victoria could have provided. Mr. Montgomery, we believe your wife was facilitating the transfer of classified economic intelligence to foreign agents. Your business network gave her access to information about defense contracts, government financial policies, even Federal Reserve decisions through your connections. The scope of the betrayal was staggering. Victoria had turned Richard into an unwitting agent of economic espionage, using their marriage to compromise national security. There's something else, Agent Kim continued. We've been monitoring communications from the federal prison where Victoria is being held. She's been using a prisoner communication system to send coded messages. To whom? We're still tracking that. But Mr. Montgomery, these messages suggest that Victoria's arrest was anticipated. Someone prepared contingency plans. Richard felt a familiar chill of fear. What kind of contingency plans? The kind that involve eliminating loose ends. That evening, Richard and Emma were moved to a safe house in Virginia. The modest suburban home felt strange after the grandeur of Richard's former penthouse and the institutional simplicity of St. Catherine's, but it was secure. Emma adapted with the resilience that constantly amazed Richard. She set up her few belongings in the bedroom they'd assigned her and immediately began exploring the small backyard. "Mr. Richard," she called from the kitchen window, "there are rabbits out here." Richard joined her, grateful for any distraction from the nightmare his life had become. 3 small rabbits were indeed grazing in the twilight, their white tails visible against the brown winter grass. "They're beautiful," he said, putting his arm around Emma's shoulders. "Grandmama used to say that when bad things happen, God sends small, beautiful things to remind us that goodness is still in the world." Emma leaned against him. Maybe the rabbits are a good sign. Richard hoped she was right, but the FBI's security measures suggested they were still in danger. His phone buzzed with a text from Agent Kim. "Need to see you immediately. New developments." An hour later, Richard sat in a secure briefing room while Emma slept safely at the house under federal protection. "We identified Victoria's handler," Agent Kim announced. "Codename the Director, real name Alexei Volkov, former KGB, now heading a private intelligence firm that contracts with several hostile foreign governments." "Where is he?" "Unknown. But Mr. Montgomery, we intercepted his latest communication to Victoria. He's activating what he calls final protocol." Richard's stomach dropped. "Which means what?" "Which means Volkov has decided that Victoria knows too much to be left alive, and that you and Emma represent unacceptable security risks." Agent Kim pulled up a classified file on her laptop. "Volkov's firm specializes in what they call permanent solutions to security problems. They've been linked to 17 suspicious deaths across 3 countries, all people who could have exposed their operations. You're saying they want to kill us? I'm saying they're going to try, but Mr. Montgomery, we're not going to let that happen. You and Emma are under federal protection, and we're going to use Victoria's trial to expose this entire network." As Richard drove back to the safe house, he thought about the journey that had brought him here. 6 months ago, he'd been a billionaire businessman worried about market fluctuations and board meetings. Now he was a federal witness whose life depended on staying one step ahead of international assassins. But he also had Emma, sleeping peacefully in the passenger seat, trusting him to keep her safe. The 8-year-old who'd saved his life was now his responsibility to protect. And protect her he would, No matter what Volkov and his people tried to do, the attack came at dawn on a Tuesday morning. Richard woke to the sound of breaking glass and Agent Thompson's urgent voice. "Package is compromised. Moving to secondary location." Emma was awake instantly, her survival instincts honed by years of uncertainty. "Mr. Richard, are the bad people here?" "Yes, sweetheart, but the good people are here too." Richard scooped her up, grateful for the evacuation drills the FBI had insisted on. They had 30 seconds to reach the panic room in the basement. Gunfire erupted from the front of the house. Through the bedroom window, Richard could see muzzle flashes in the pre-dawn darkness. Professional killers had found them, despite the FBI's best efforts. Agent Thompson appeared in the doorway, blood streaming from a head wound. "Sir, we need to go now." They made it to the basement as the front door exploded inward. Richard could hear boots on the hardwood floors above, voices speaking in what sounded like Russian. Emma pressed against his chest, silent but alert. "Papa," she whispered, the first time she'd used that word. "Are we going to be okay?" "Yes, baby girl, I promise." The panic room was equipped with communications gear. Agent Thompson was already calling for backup while applying pressure to his wound. "ETA on reinforcements is 12 minutes, he reported. "We don't have 12 minutes, Richard replied, listening to the systematic search happening above them. "They know we're here." Thompson nodded grimly. "There's an escape tunnel. It leads to a drainage culvert 3 blocks away. But, sir, I can't make that run with this injury." "Then we go without you." "Negative. My job is to protect you both." Thompson checked his weapon. "I'll hold them here as long as possible. You get the girl to safety." Richard understood what the agent was offering, his life for theirs. "Agent Thompson, sir, that little girl exposed an international espionage ring. She's more valuable to national security than any of us." Thompson's voice was firm. "Get her out of here." The tunnel was cramped and dark, barely wide enough for Richard to crawl through while carrying Emma. Behind them, they could hear gunfire as Agent Thompson made his stand. "Is the nice man going to be okay?" Emma whispered. Richard couldn't lie to her. "I don't know, sweetheart, but he's very brave, and he's doing his job." They emerged from the drainage culvert into grey morning light. Richard's phone had a single bar of signal. He called the emergency number Agent Kim had given him. "We're out," he reported tersely, giving their location. "Stay put. Extraction team is 2 minutes away." But as Richard scanned the suburban street, he saw a black SUV turning the corner, moving too fast for the residential neighborhood. The windows were tinted, and something about the vehicle's approach set off every alarm in his head. "Emma, we need to run." They sprinted across backyards, through gardens, past startled homeowners letting their dogs out for morning walks. Behind them, Richard could hear car doors slamming, voices shouting in foreign languages. Emma's small legs couldn't maintain the pace. Richard picked her up again, his lungs burning as he pushed toward the main road where FBI backup would hopefully intercept them. "Mr. Richard," Emma gasped, "there's a man with a gun behind us." Richard risked a glance back. A figure in black tactical gear was pursuing them, weapon drawn. Professional, methodical, closing distance. They reached the main road, just as FBI vehicles came screaming around the corner. The tactical situation shifted instantly. The lone pursuer retreated rather than engage multiple federal agents. Agent Kim was out of the lead vehicle before it fully stopped. "Are you hurt?" "We're okay," Richard panted. "But Agent Thompson, KIA, along with 2 of the attackers." Kim's voice was professionally controlled, but Richard could see the anger in her eyes. "Mr. Montgomery, this changes everything. Volkov has declared open war." As they drove toward a new safe house, Emma sat quietly beside Richard, processing what they'd just experienced. "Papa," she said finally, "the man who died to protect us, he was good like my grandmama, wasn't he?" "Yes, baby girl, he was very good. Then we have to make sure what he did matters. We have to stop the bad people so other families don't get hurt." Richard looked at his 8-year-old daughter, this remarkable child who understood justice and sacrifice better than most adults, and made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "Emma, What if I told you there was a way to stop the bad people, but it would be dangerous for us? Emma considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important questions. Would it help other children like me, children who don't have anyone to protect them? Yes, it would help a lot of people. Emma nodded firmly. Then we have to do it. Grandmama always said that when you can help people, you don't get to choose whether it's safe or not. You just have to help. Agent Kim, listening from the front seat, turned back to look at them. Mr. Montgomery, what are you thinking? I'm thinking it's time to stop running and start fighting back. The plan was audacious and dangerous. Use Victoria's sentencing hearing to draw Volkov into the open. Richard would testify publicly about the full scope of the espionage operation, making himself irresistible bait for the Russian operative who needed him silenced. Absolutely not, Agent Kim said when Richard first proposed it. We're talking about using you as live bait for one of the world's most dangerous assassins. You're talking about ending this, Richard countered. How many other families will Volkov destroy while we hide in safe houses? How many other children will lose their parents to his operations? They were in a secure FBI facility outside Washington. D.C. Emma was in an adjacent room with a child psychologist, drawing pictures of the rabbits they'd seen at the last safe house. Her resilience continued to amaze Richard, but he could see the stress in the dark circles under her eyes. Agent Kim pulled up files on her computer. Volkov has evaded capture for 15 years. He's suspected in dozens of murders, but we've never been able to prove anything. He's a ghost. Ghosts become real when they're desperate, Richard replied. Right now, Volkov knows that Victoria can implicate him in federal court. If I testify about the intelligence she gathered, about the foreign contacts she facilitated, he'll have to act. And when he does, you'll be dead. Not if you're ready for him. The FBI's counterintelligence division spent 3 days planning the operation. The courthouse would be secured, with federal agents posing as court personnel, journalists and spectators. Snipers would cover every possible vantage point. Electronic surveillance would monitor all communications within a 2-mile radius. But Richard's most important protection would be Emma herself. I don't understand, she said when he explained the plan. How can I help catch the bad man? By being exactly who you are, sweetheart. Smart, observant, and honest. Richard knelt to her level. During the hearing, you'll be in a special room where you can see everything but stay safe. If you notice anything unusual, anything that doesn't feel right, you tell Agent Kim immediately. Emma nodded seriously, like when I saw the mean lady and knew she was dangerous. Exactly like that. The morning of Victoria's sentencing, the federal courthouse in Manhattan was locked down tighter than a military base. Richard walked through multiple security checkpoints, each one reminding him that his life depended on the FBI's preparation. Victoria looked different in the defendant's chair, smaller, older, defeated. The months in federal prison had stripped away her artificial confidence. But when she saw Richard enter the courtroom, her eyes still held that familiar coldness. Your Honor, D.A. Wells began, before we proceed to sentencing, the prosecution has additional testimony that goes to the heart of this defendant's crimes against national security. Judge Harrison nodded. Mr. Montgomery, you may proceed. For the next 2 hours, Richard laid out everything. The foreign contacts Victoria had arranged, the intelligence she'd gathered, the classified information she'd accessed through his business relationships. He named names, dates, locations, creating a public record that would destroy Volkov's entire network. Victoria's lawyer objected repeatedly, but the damage was done. Richard had just painted a target on himself that Volkov couldn't ignore. Your Honor, Richard concluded, Victoria Montgomery didn't just steal money. She weaponized marriage itself, turning love and trust into tools of espionage. The 17 families she destroyed, the national security secrets she compromised, the American citizens she betrayed, these crimes demand the maximum penalty. As Richard left the witness stand, he caught Victoria's eye one final time. She was no longer the woman he'd married, no longer the person he'd thought he knew. She was revealed completely. A predator who destroyed lives for money and ideology. Judge Harrison sentenced Victoria Montgomery to 45 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. As the courtroom cleared, Agent Kim's voice crackled through Richard's earpiece. Possible target acquired. Male, mid-50s, observer gallery, section 3, moving to intercept. But Emma's voice came through even clearer on the secure channel. Papa, the bad man isn't in the big room. He's in the hallway by the back stairs. I can see him through the camera screen. Richard felt his blood freeze. Volkov had anticipated the FBI's security measures and positioned himself outside their perimeter. Emma, can you describe him? White hair, dark coat, and Papa, he has the same scary eyes as the mean lady, like they don't care about hurting people. Agent Kim was already moving. All units, target is not in courtroom. Repeat, target is in the building but outside primary security zone. The next few minutes unfolded like a deadly chess game. FBI agents converged on the back stairs while Richard was evacuated through the main entrance. But Volkov was a professional. He'd already anticipated their response and melted away into the crowded streets of Manhattan. We lost him, Agent Kim reported grimly, but Emma's identification was perfect. We have facial recognition, gait analysis, everything we need to track him. As they drove away from the courthouse, Emma leaned against Richard's shoulder. Did we win, Papa? We won this round, baby girl, but the game isn't over yet. Emma was quiet for a moment. Will it ever be over? Richard thought about Volkov, still out there, still dangerous. About Victoria, finally facing justice. About Agent Thompson, who died protecting them. Yes, sweetheart, it will be over. And when it is, we're going to build the most beautiful life together. 6 months later, Richard stood in the garden of their new home in Virginia, watching Emma play with their golden retriever puppy, Justice, a name she'd chosen because he's good and loyal and protects people he loves. The house was modest compared to the Manhattan penthouse, but it was theirs, real, built on truth instead of lies. Volkov had been captured 3 weeks after the courthouse incident, taken down by an international task force in Prague. The intelligence Emma had provided had been crucial. Her description had led to facial recognition software identifying him at a hotel, where surveillance footage revealed his entire support network. Victoria would spend the rest of her life in federal prison. The $42 billion stolen from her victims had been largely recovered from offshore accounts, though the emotional damage to the families would take longer to heal. Richard's phone buzzed with a text from Agent Kim. Congressional hearing went well. Emma's testimony sealed the case for new legislation protecting children who report national security crimes. She's a genuine American hero. Emma had indeed testified before Congress, her honest courage helping to pass the Child Witness Protection Act. But more importantly, she'd helped 17 families get their lives back. Papa! Emma called from the garden. Justice found something. Richard walked over to where Emma was kneeling beside the puppy, who'd been digging near the fence. What is it, sweetheart? Bulbs. Flower bulbs. Emma held up the dirt-covered treasures. The people who lived here before us planted them for spring. Should we replant them? Emma nodded enthusiastically. Grandmama always said that when people plant flowers, they're making promises to the future. They're saying they believe good things will grow. As they worked together in the afternoon sun, planting tulips and daffodils for next spring, Richard reflected on the journey that had brought them here. A year ago, he'd lost everything he thought mattered, but in losing his false life, he'd found his real one. Papa, Emma said, her small hands carefully patting soil around a bulb, do you ever miss being rich? Richard considered the question seriously. I miss some things about that life. The security, the comfort, the ability to help people easily. But not the mean lady? No, baby girl, not the mean lady. Emma nodded sagely. I think maybe you needed to lose the fake family so you could find the real family out of the mouths of babes. Richard looked at his daughter, brilliant, brave, wise beyond her 8 years, and realized she was absolutely right. "Emma, do you know what I'm most grateful for?" "What, Papa?" "That night when you decided to help a sad man you barely knew. You saved my life in every way that matters." Emma smiled, that radiant expression that could light up the darkest moments. "You saved mine too, Papa. Before you, I was just Emma who lived at the children's home. Now I'm Emma Montgomery, and I have a father who keeps his promises." As evening fell, Richard and Emma sat on their front porch, watching the neighbors walk their dogs and children play in yards. It was an ordinary suburban scene, peaceful and safe. "Papa," Emma said, leaning against his arm, "what do you think we'll do tomorrow? What would you like to do? Maybe visit Sister Margaret at the children's home? I want to tell the other kids that good families are real, not just in movies." "That sounds perfect, sweetheart." "And Papa, can we bring Justice? I think the kids would like to meet him." "Of course." Emma was quiet for a moment, then asked the question that showed how much she'd grown. "Do you think there are other children out there who need help like I did? Children whose grown-ups aren't keeping their promises?" Richard felt his heart swell with pride and purpose. "Yes, baby girl, I think there are. Then maybe we should help them too. When I'm older, I mean. Maybe we could build a place where children who notice important things get listened to, not ignored." Richard looked at his remarkable daughter, already planning to use her experiences to help others, and realized that Victoria's greatest failure wasn't stealing his money or betraying his trust. Her greatest failure was underestimating the power of love, loyalty, and truth. "Emma Montgomery," he said, "I think you're going to change the world." "We're going to change the world, Papa, together." As the first stars appeared in the Virginia sky, Richard Montgomery held his daughter close and knew that every loss, every betrayal, every moment of pain had been worth it to arrive at this perfect, ordinary, extraordinary moment. The flowers they'd planted would bloom in spring, just as Emma had said. Promises to the future. Proof that good things grow when they're planted with love and tended with care. Richard and Emma Montgomery were finally, truly home.